What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with Commanders. Adam Peters has finally done it. He's brought in his first draft class as the Washington Commanders general manager, and boy, do we have some stuff to go over. I already talked about Jane Daniels and my thoughts on that pick. You can check out the other episode that we did earlier this week, but today I'm going to be going over all the day 2 selections. Adam Peters was very busy on day 2 making some interesting decisions. And then on day 3, when things were more low-key for Washington, having only 3 picks, 2 in the 5th round and 1 in the 7th round, he kind of just did his thing. He got some players for Dan Quinn's defense, really, that I think could all be impact players for the Washington Commanders. So we'll start with day 2 and what Washington did on day 2 because, oh boy, things went down. Things went down. Washington entered the day having 5 draft picks, or was it 4 draft picks on day 2 of the NFL? Wait, was it 5? It was 5 draft picks. 5 draft picks on day 2 of the NFL draft. That you had 36, you had 40, and then you had, what was it, like 60, 68, 78, and 100, something like that. But Washington ended up making a trade. But before we get to that trade, I have to first talk about what Washington did at the 36th overall pick when they decided to select a defensive tackle out of Illinois, that being Johnny Newton, my top defensive tackle prospect or interior defensive line prospect in this class by a good margin. I know some people were higher on Byron Murphy. I still had a first round grade on Murphy, but I had Johnny Newton as a top 15 prospect in this class. Now, the first reaction, of course, is, are you serious? Another defensive tackle prospect? Like, what are we doing here? We've got Daron Payne. We've got Jonathan Allen. I mean, Ron Rivera decided to select Fidarian Mathis 2 years ago in the 2nd round as well. We're kind of loaded. Like, of all the positions that we need right now, defensive tackle is probably the one that we're the most fine with. And, well, Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, they decide to go with another defensive tackle prospect. Now, I do want to make one thing clear. Even though it's not a position of need, even though this is another 2nd-round defensive tackle that Washington has taken, Johnny Newton is not Fidarian Mathis. He's not going to be another Fidarian Mathis. Of course, Mathis is unfortunate. His rookie season ended on like the 2nd play of his career, week 1, and then he hasn't really come to kind of been the same type of player since. He's kind of just been a rotational run stopper every once in a while, but he's kind of struggled to see the field really over these last 2 years. Again, for a 2nd-round pick, that's not really what you want to see happen. But Johnny Newton is going to see the field. He is going to see the field from the start. He's going to make an impact from the start. He's got great quick hands in his pass rush, powerful off the snap. He makes vicious wrap-up tackles on ball carriers. I love this pick for the Washington Commanders. I gave this in my article for the Right Way Sports Network. Of course, you can see all my writing work over there at twsn.net, where I graded each of these picks one by one, gave them all a letter grade, gave the entire class a letter grade as well. I gave Johnny Newton an A- selection, or A- grade here, and I love it. I love it. I'm a pretty harsh grader. I'm not one of those where like, oh, hey, C is like the worst grade you can get, An A- grade is a great pickup, in my opinion. The only knack I had against it was that, of course, it wasn't really a position of need. The player himself is going to be an absolute monster. The trio of Daron Payne, Johnny Newton, and Jonathan Allen is going to be absolutely incredible. It's going to be one of the hardest trios to stop in the entire league next year. But, of course, potentially you could have gone DB. You potentially could have gone something else. I mean, Cooper DeJean was on the board there. You could have gone offensive tackle maybe. I don't feel like you would have gotten good value there. Offensive tackle, you'd probably have to go interior. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson was still on the board if you wanted to go interior, but that's not really where Washington was looking. It didn't really seem like Washington was in love with any of these offensive line prospects, interestingly enough, as we're going to move on, and you're going to see why in a little bit. But Johnny Newton, he's team captain as a junior. I wrote in my notes, he got that dog in him, right? So Johnny Newton, I love this. This also means that I do expect Washington to kind of move to Dan Quinn's 34 base scheme. I know in Ron Rivera, we ran a 4-3 a lot. to make sure we had all 4 of our first round picks on the field at the same time. We don't really need that anymore with no more Chase Young, no more Montez Sweat. We don't really need to have like all of these edge rushers on the field at the same time, which if we go to a 3-4, you can have Jonathan Allen in the middle, Deron Payne on one side, and Johnny Newton on the other side, and boom. Sometimes you can put maybe Dorrance Armstrong, and maybe you could sub in Frankie Louver on the other side, or Dante Fowler, KJ Henry as the other pass rusher as well. I mean, this is going to be an incredible front three from the Washington Commanders next year. Plus, of course, the linebackers, like I mentioned, Luvu, like I mentioned, Bobby Wagner and Jamin Davis as well. So I really like this selection from Washington. I gave it an A- grade in my article. I think this was, in my opinion, the Commanders' best pick of this draft was getting Johnny Newton. So that's just how much I loved this selection for the Washington Commanders. Moving on now, again, I mentioned there was a busy day too because Washington had 5 selections going into the day. Washington ended up trading the 40th overall pick. I mentioned it in my previous podcast. I did expect them to not pick at both 36 and 40. I expected them to move at least one of those picks. They do end up moving pick number 40. They traded it with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles, which a very gutsy move from Adam Peters to trade with a division rival, solely division rival, can move up to select Cooper DeJean, consensusly one of the top cornerbacks in this draft class, and a team that really is a pretty good overall team beyond the corner position. You gave him a very good one in Cooper DeJean. Again, I think I've said it before, I'm not as high on Cooper DeJean as probably the consensus is, but again, he's still a very good player. I had a second round grade on him. I think he's going to be a very good impact player for the Philadelphia Eagles. But Washington ended up trading out of pick number 40. They ended up trading for, or getting in return, picks 50, 53, and 161, which I believe that 161, I want to say, was a 6th round pick, maybe a 5th round pick, somewhere around there. And then they ended up giving up 40, 78, and 152. So they moved back in the 6th round. They moved back in the 2nd and the 6th round, and they moved up from the 3rd round to the 2nd round. They moved up 25 spots from 78 to 53, moved down from 40 to 50, and moved down from 161 to 152. So that's where Washington was at. I put this into the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, and it ended up saying that Washington won this trade, of course, because I think the point system or whatever had Washington at around 790 points, and the Eagles' value that they were getting was about 730. So you had that extra tax that I did expect that compensation to have for it being an interdivision trade. Again, the Eagles really wanted a guy like Cooper DeJean. The ability to pair him up with Quinyon Mitchell is just going to be crazy. That's going to be a very good cornerback duo in this league. So I think of course Adam Peters had to put a little bit of a tax there, and they ended up making the trade happen. So the Eagles overpay a little bit to be able to get to Cooper DeJean. The Commanders moved back while also picking up an extra 2nd round pick in return. With the first of those picks that they got back, pick number 50, they selected Mike Sanderstill, the cornerback out of Michigan. I've talked about Sanderstill a little bit on this podcast, but I feel like I haven't really given him as much praise as I probably should have. I think I had a late 2 on him. Late 2 on Sanderstill, maybe an early 3, but I think for this value, you had a lot of corners going off the board. I think I can definitely see why they selected Sanderstill a little bit higher maybe than I would have personally selected him, but I also just think the fit in the role also is what makes this pick so great. And overpaying for a guy like Sanderstill, because Sanderstill, in case you don't know, he's 5'11", he's a very smaller cornerback. He's primarily going to be a slot corner in the NFL, and that is exactly what Washington needs. That is exactly what the missing piece in that secondary that Dan Quinn, Joe Witt want to have is a slot guy. You had Quan Martin kind of playing that role a little bit in the Rivera and Del Rio defense last year. Did not really work out. And so you kind of like Quan played a lot better at his primary safety spot, which is kind of what he played at towards the end of the season. You could really see he was kind of fitting into the groove of the NFL level towards the end of that season. And it was really cool to see because Quan Martin now in 2024 is going to move back to a safety spot. I'm going to guess he's probably going to play free safety so he can move around a little bit. Yeah, at strong safety, you're going to have Derek Forrest, who's going to move over from free safety to strong safety and be that Cam Curl replacement. So with Curl out, Quan Martin is going to be probably moving back up to a safety spot long term. Again, you've got Jeremy Chin in that situation as well. You can potentially move up to safety. Mike Sanders still is going to be a great slot corner. He's the number one slot corner in this class, in my opinion. I think he's pretty much does it all from that slot corner position. Again, he's pretty small. I don't think he will work out on the outside. He's going to be primarily a slot guy. He's great tackler in open space, great container of the ball carrier. If he has a bad angle, he's not looking to take that bad angle and miss a tackle. He's looking just to contain, slow the ball carrier down, which I really like to see. He's a hard hitter. He makes hard hitting tackles. And like I mentioned, you'll play that star/slot hybrid role, that kind of in those nickel packages. That's where Sanders still is going to thrive, in my opinion. So that's my thoughts on Mike Sanders still. He's probably one of the best corners we've selected in the last few drafts, I would say. I definitely had a higher grade on him than I had on Emmanuel Forbes and some of the other guys we've picked up over the last few years. So, in my opinion, he's the best corner we've selected in pretty much. And I'm probably forgetting someone, so I don't want to say like the entire Ron Rivera era, but a good majority of it at least. So that's what happened at pick 50. Moving on to pick 53, this was the third and final second round pick for the Washington Commanders. They selected Josh Taylor's very own Ben Sinnott, the tight end out of Kansas State. And I mean, if you're watching this podcast, you probably have heard of Josh Taylor, one of the bigger Commanders podcasters, talk show guys, and he's been a Sinnott fan for as long as I can remember. I remember talking to him at the Senior Bowl and during the combine as well about why did he like Sinnott so much, and I was actually able to talk to Sinnott with him. And when we met him at the Senior Bowl, and I mean, he kind of just does a little bit of everything. He's like a Swiss Army knife. That's what I have him listed as. He won the award for the nation's best fullback, but don't think of him as a fullback. He's like a tight end that can do a little bit of everything. He can block, but he really excels, in my opinion, in that passing game. When he has the ball in open space, he can make people miss. I really like his game a lot. Again, I'm a little bit lower on the tight end class beyond Brock Bowers. Even I was low on Brock Bowers. I'm kind of just lower on the tight end class in general compared to a lot of people. And so Sinnott to me was a kind of later third round guy. So getting him late second round was kind of, I don't think he was late third round. I think he was probably middle of third round to early third round. So I take that back. Probably early to middle third round. I'll have to look back and check. But I had Sinnott as my tight end too. He ended up being the second tight end off the board. And I think Washington got a great one. It's an interesting fit because you still have John Bates. You still have Cole Turner there. And you have Zach Ertz as well. So you kind of have these four tight ends. Plus, you're going to get Armani Rogers. I'm assuming Armani Rogers comes back for OTAs and training camp and stuff. And he was probably the most athletic tight end that Washington had on the roster last year before tearing, it was either his Achilles or his ACL before training camp even began. So that one kind of hurt the tight end position a lot. I was looking forward to seeing him more. But Sinnott, I think, is going to be an incredible tight end for Washington. He can kind of sit back. He doesn't need to take a large role in this offense immediately, which I also like. Zach Ertz kind of will be that lead tight end one to begin the year, and then you can slowly move in Ben Sinnott into the rotation at tight end, which I really like a lot. So I like the pick. I think it was a little bit rich, though, in my opinion, but it was a solid pickup. I know Josh Taylor was very happy after that one because he's been a Sinnott fan for a long, long time. So that was the pick at 53. At 67, Brennan Coleman, the tackle guard out of TCU. Okay, so this pick is definitely one of the more interesting ones in my opinion. Coleman, he's a very raw tackle prospect, right? So Washington, who needs a left tackle, decided to not go left tackle with their first 4 selections, which, okay, that's fine, right? I mean, we've gotten some good players. If that means still getting Johnny Newton over maybe reaching on a guy like Patrick Paul, that's fine with me. Sanders still, Sinnott, some of those guys maybe a little bit too rich for my liking, but whatever. And then Brandon Coleman, very raw prospect. He is a very athletic prospect too. He is 6'6", 320. He almost has 35-inch arms, which is crazy. He played time at tackle and at guard at TCU. Kind of struggled a little bit more last year because once he started the year at guard and then he was kicked out the tackle and he kind of struggled a little bit, but kind of you could tell find his groove going throughout the year. He's got a very athletic, like I mentioned, RAS profile. Is he starting caliber week 1? That's the question, because who's going to be blocking Jane Daniels' blindside? Will it be Cornelius Lucas? Will it be Brandon Coleman? Will it be potentially Braden Daniels from a 4th-round pick last year that was pretty much had a redshirt year over the 2023 season? We haven't heard anything about him. I don't know what he's going. He's also a project guy, so I'm not sure if a project guy was the right move here for Washington. If they were to go with a project tackle, I would have rather traded up a little bit for Kingsley Suamatea, the tackle out of BYU. Suamatea went only a few picks earlier to the Kansas City Chiefs, who also traded up a little bit, I think 1 spot or 2 spots to get him. So I would have rather, again, you got a lot, you kind of used your capital already that you got in the Eagles trade, but I wouldn't even mind trading like a future 4 to go up 10 spots to get Kingsley Suamatea. So I wouldn't, I would have gone Suamatea there instead of what's his name? But instead of Brandon Coleman. So that's just my preference. And then the final pick on day 2 of the NFL draft, the Washington Commanders with the final pick number 100, selected Luke McCaffrey, the wide receiver, the quarterback turned wide receiver, and Christian McCaffrey's brother. He's out of Rice. This one was probably my least favorite pick, I would say, of the picks that we made. Wide receiver, that was the right choice. I give it to Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. They recognized the problem on this roster, and they delivered with every single pick. Like, they picked a position of need with every single pick. I mean, maybe safety, I'll get to that in a little bit, wasn't really the biggest need, but they picked a position of need with every single pick, excluding the Johnny Newton one, which is very understandable, though, why they picked Johnny Newton over a position of need there. But Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver was the right pick at 100 for 100%. You have Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. You still got De'Ami Brown. You lost Curtis Samuel. You need a wide receiver. And I was kind of hoping for maybe Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin fell to Washington at pick 100. He went 2 picks later after the Broncos traded up for him in the 4th round to begin day 3. But I was kind of hoping for Troy Franklin. McCaffrey and Franklin are 2 guys. I mean, Franklin's is definitely like smaller weight wise than Luke McCaffrey is, but they're both, I believe, 6'2", 6'3", somewhere around there. Franklin's more of a deep threat, speedy guy. Luke McCaffrey is more of a sticky hands type guy, which it was cool seeing Luke McCaffrey at the Senior Bowl. I think he impressed me definitely a lot there, but McCaffrey was a lot lower on my board. I think I had a 5 on a 5th round grade on him, which there was just other options at wide receiver. I think McCaffrey can still be a good player. He's got sticky hands. He needs to learn a little bit more. Just not a lot of experience at wide receiver. Again, was a former quarterback, I believe, at Wisconsin before transferring over to Rice. So not my favorite pick, but it was the correct position of choice. And Adam Peters, to this point, again, because we haven't seen this team on a football field, Adam Peters has my trust right now, right? And he's going to have my trust all offseason long until we get to the preseason games, until we get to week 1, until we see what these players and what these schemes look like on the field and what this personnel looks like on the field. So Adam Peters has my trust. Again, same with the Coleman pick too. If he thinks Brandon Coleman can be a tackle in the NFL, if he thinks Luke McCaffrey can be a valuable wide receiver 3 in the NFL on a team, then go for it. Go ahead and select him. Like I trust their evaluations until they lose my trust with the evaluations. So Luke McCaffrey was the final pick on day 2. Now moving on to the day 3 selections, because that was the big day was the day 2 ones. Washington only made 3 selections on day 3. Pick 149 in the 5th round. They picked Jordan McGee, the linebacker out of Temple. This was this was by far my favorite pick in day 3. I think it's kind of obvious that you'll see in a second. It's kind of obvious who my kind of the order of these 3 picks, how much I like each one of them. But Jordan McGee was my favorite pick. He was the number 1 linebacker at the combine. He had a 6.9 second 3 cone, 14 tackles for loss in 2023 as a linebacker, by the way, 90.7 PFF grade, right? As a pass rusher, which is absurd. As a linebacker, again, as a linebacker. So what does this remind you of? 20 pressures, 6 sacks, and only 32 pass rush snaps. Who does that remind you of? Frankie Louvu, right? That reminds you of Frankie Louvu, because Louvu, when we signed him, when he became a free agent, he was a middle linebacker that was pretty okay in coverage. I mean, slightly below average, but he was like valid in coverage. But he also could rush the passer, and he did it at a very efficient clip last year for the Carolina Panthers. Jordan McGee, who, again, Washington needed depth at linebacker beyond Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, and Jamin Davis. Those were the only 3 linebackers, I believe. Oh, and Mikael Walker as well was also one of the linebackers selected. Oh, not selected. One of the linebackers signed over free agency. But Jordan McGee, I think is a great developmental piece. I think you can learn a lot from a guy like Frankie Louvu, because he reminds me a lot of Frankie Louvu in terms of his pass rush ability as a linebacker, as an off-ball linebacker. So I don't know how much time in the rotation he's going to get immediately. I don't expect it to be a lot, but I'm very excited for this pick, because I think he can really turn out to be something special. He's a very athletic linebacker. Like I mentioned, number 1 at the combine. He was ranked, I believe, as the most athletic linebacker in this class too. So yeah, I'm super excited for this pick. This was probably the pick that I feel like McGee, of these last 3 picks, of Luke McCaffrey, of Brandon Coleman, Sinan, and Sanders still, I think McGee might have the highest ceiling. I don't know if he will hit that ceiling, but I think he can be a starter on this team. Maybe not this year, because you have Wagner and some of these other guys on 1-year deals, but who are going to take up a lot of playing time. But maybe next year, heading into the 2025 season, McGee is a starter on this team. I would not be surprised. I love this selection for Washington. I think McGee has a bright future in this league. It's just more about development. Can he be better in coverage? And kind of just also using him the right way, which the additions of Frankie Louvu kind of makes me feel like this is a Dan Quinn selection. He's going to have his off-ball linebackers rush off the edge sometimes, rush from different spots on the field, and I'm excited for it. So, 149, Jordan McGee, linebacker out of Temple. At pick 161 now, another 5th-round pick. Dominique Hampton, safety out of Washington. Only allowed 1 touchdown this year. 6'3", 220, another big safety hybrid. We kind of saw that with Dan Quinn's Dallas Cowboys, except the guys he got in like a safety linebacker hybrid were very small. Learned from that. Took a big guy, 6'3", 220, who can play both safety, and I feel like he can also play in the box a little bit as well. Who does this remind you of that's on the Washington Commanders roster? Another former Panther, Jeremy Chinn. He kind of reminds me of Jeremy Chinn in terms of the role he could play in this defense. I think Chinn, of course, will definitely kind of be all over the field. He's going to be playing potentially in the slot too, along with deep safety and in the box and rushing off the edge. So Chinn will be doing a lot. I think Hampton is kind of like the guy that maybe develops behind Chinn. Maybe a little bit of a trend here. McGee kind of develops behind Frankie Louvu a little bit, and then Hampton kind of develops behind Chinn a little bit. I kind of see what Dan Quinn is doing here with these 2 selections. So these 2 are both interesting to me. And then in the 7th round at pick 222, I love this pick. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the edge rusher out of Notre Dame. He had 4 years at Ohio State, 2 great seasons. His senior year at Ohio State in 2022. Last year after he transferred in 2023, is when he really broke out. He had, I believe, 10.5 tackles for loss, I want to say, last season with 5 sacks. Great run stopper. He had very high PFF run stopping grade. He can bring explosion in the pass rush as well. Had a 5th-round grade on him, so great value for the Washington Commanders getting him in the 7th round. Probably, I would say, would make the final roster as well. Again, all of these guys, I think, could make the final roster. The only ones I'm maybe concerned about is Dominique Hampton, because, again, that kind of corner safety room is very, very, very packed right now. There's a lot of players there, so I'm not. It's more of kind of just there's a lot of players, not sure if he's going to like be able to beat out some of these veterans. So that's the only one really I'm kind of concerned about not making the final roster. Jean-Baptiste, I think, can definitely make the final roster. He's going to compete probably with KJ Henry and Andre Jones for that final spot. I think Jean-Baptiste can definitely beat out Andre Jones for that final spot. So we'll have to wait and see come training camp in August. But that was the class for the Washington Commanders. Going over it one more time. Pick number 2, Jane Daniels, the quarterback of the future out of LSU. Pick 36, Johnny Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. Pick 50, Mike Sainristil, cornerback out of Michigan. Pick 53, Ben Sinnott, tight end out of Kansas. Pick 67, Brandon Coleman, offensive tackle guard out of TCU. Pick number 100, Luke McCaffrey, the wide receiver out of Rice. Pick 149, Jordan McGee, linebacker out of Temple. Pick 161, Dominique Hampton, safety out of Washington. And pick 222, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the edge rusher out of Notre Dame. So that is the draft class for the Washington Commanders. Yeah, the first draft class for Adam Peters. I'll go over the overall grade in a little bit, but I was very impressed. If you look back at Ron Rivera and all the stuff that he did, he could never really identify these positions of need. And even though Washington may have reached on some of these players, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn addressed the positions of need. They saw the linebacker position, and they addressed it. Not only did they address in free agency by adding Bobby Wagner, by adding Frankie Louvu, right? But they also addressed it in the draft. Like, when was the last time I don't even know if Ron Rivera ever added four new linebackers in one free agency. I don't remember the last time he could turn around a position like that. We were running out Cody Barton last year with David Mayo, and now we're going to be running out Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner with a guy like Jordan McGee behind him who's going to be developing, and Jamin Davis too, because, I mean, of course, like Washington declining the 5th-year option on Jamin Davis right before the draft. I mean, we don't know his future in Washington. Jordan McGee could be his replacement. So I really like these selections a lot for the Washington Commanders. You can really tell they're planning ahead with some of these day 3 selections. So that's kind of my thoughts on the overall picks. Now, one trend I did see with these selections was the athleticism. I mentioned it multiple times, especially with some of these picks, but the Washington Commanders had the most athletic draft class in the NFL this season, this season. They had the most athletic draft class. Now, what does this mean? Of course, looking at relative athletic score created by MathBomb, it looks at the percentile of how each prospect does in each of the drills at the NFL Scouting Combine. We look at the class for the Washington Commanders. Jane Daniels and Johnny Newton both didn't participate in the NFL Scouting Combine, so those are kind of exempt. But beyond that, Mike Sainristil was in the 84th percentile among cornerbacks. Ben Sinnott was in the 97th percentile among tight ends. Brandon Coleman was in the 99th percentile among guards. Luke McCaffrey, 94th percentile. Jordan McGee, 96th percentile. Dominique Hampton, 95th percentile. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, 92nd percentile. Adam Peters does not have players that have a below 8.0 RAS score on his draft board. I'm telling you right now, athletic players after athletic players, you get the athletes and you develop the athletes into being great players in the NFL at the NFL level. That's Adam Peters' plan with this draft class, and I love it. I love the plan. because again, Johnny Newton, if he tested, would have been high up as an athlete as well. Jane Daniels, of course, would be high up as an athlete. You can see what he can do in the run game. We look at the class last year, right? And last year's class for Ron Rivera was really the first year when he kind of prioritized athletes, right? Emmanuel Forbes in the 92nd percentile, Quan Martin 92nd percentile, Ricky Stromberg 95, Braden Daniels 95. But then the day 3 picks was really when it kind of fell off. KJ Henry was in the 83rd. Chris Rodriguez was only in the 77th percentile. And then Andre Jones didn't even get an invite to the combine. So, I mean, you look at the athletes this year. I mean, Adam Peters was selecting athletes from pick 1 to pick 2 to pick 222. All of them pure athletes ranked in the 84th percentile or above. Great stuff. Great stuff from Adam Peters and company. Love to see it. So with that being said, draft came to an end. UDFA time for the Washington Commanders. Pardon me. Let's look at this. The Washington Commanders so far, and just make sure it's not updated. Oh, it is updated. Okay, a lot of these have come in. Washington Commanders' first big name was Sam Hartman, quarterback out of Notre Dame. He probably, I mean, I don't expect him to make the roster, the final roster. He's probably maybe a practice squad guy. Washington now has 5 quarterbacks. You have Jane Daniels, Marcus Mariota, Jeff Driscoll, Jake Fromm, Sam Hartman. Too many quarterbacks. There's too many quarterbacks. I expect one of them to be cut before training camp. So that's my thoughts on that. Marcus Rosemead, Jack Saint, wide receiver out of Georgia. He's a touchdown machine over there for the Georgia Bulldogs. I like that signing a lot. Austin Jones, running back out of USC. AJ Woods. Austin Jones was getting a lot of praise from Caleb Williams, by the way. AJ Woods, cornerback out of Pittsburgh. Norrell Pollard, defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. Tyler Owens, the DB out of Texas Tech. I love this one a lot. Tyler Owens, one of the most athletic prospects, not only just out of his position, safety or corner, whatever. He is one of the most athletic prospects in the NFL draft. He had a over 12-foot broad jump at the NFL Scouting Combine. He had a 41-inch vertical as well. I believe at 6'2", 6'2", 6'3", and then like 218 pounds, I believe, is what he measured in at. Now his combine was cut short because he suffered. I think he like strained his hamstring or something. So his combine was cut short, unfortunately. But he would have easily gotten a 100th percentile score. Easily would have gotten a 100th percentile score. So that's Tyler Owens, and then Chig Anuzim, the corner out of Colorado State. Michael Wiley was an interesting one, another running back out of Arizona. Bo Bauer, linebacker out of Notre Dame. Ben Nickel, the safety out of Iowa State. And David Nuwagugu, the offensive tackle out of Toledo. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. I'm going to figure that out. But those are the UDFA signings so far for the Washington Commanders. Let's see. The Washington Commanders are at 11 signings. I expect them to be a little bit more. I'm recording this. It's 11:40 at night, so there'll probably be a few more going into the morning on Sunday. Washington is going to officially announce these UDFA signings on Monday morning. So that's who Washington signed so far. The overall grade for this draft class for these UDFAs, I'm going to give this a B- to B. All right? Hear me out. You might think it's a little bit low. I was praising these guys a lot. I do feel like we reached on a few prospects. Brendan Coleman was one of them. Luke McCaffrey, I feel like we could have done better. Dominique Hampton, I don't really know if we need another safety in the 5th round. I feel like we could have gone maybe offensive line again. So those kind of were a little bit interesting. And of course, Jane Daniels, you guys know my take. Would have rather gone Drake May there 100% of the time. So if that backfires on me and Jane Daniels becomes a superstar, then oh well. I'll take the heat if my team has a superstar franchise quarterback. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I'd probably give this a B- to B. I don't think any of these picks are home runs picks. Like the only one really past round 2 that I could see being a home run is Jordan McGee linebacker out of Temple. But beyond that, I don't think any of these picks are home run. I wouldn't really call any of these picks bust, but I would say some of these are very, very big project guys. Brandon Coleman is a project guy. McGee's a project guy. Jean Baptiste is a little bit of a project as well. Sinnott and Moore, you gotta use them right if for Sinnott. So that's my thoughts on the Commanders draft. 35-minute long episode. But yeah, that'll do it for today's episode. Tomorrow, another episode. Third episode in the week for tomorrow. I'm going to be joined by Jackson Powers to discuss our biggest winners, our biggest losers, biggest draft steals, biggest not draft steals. I'm blanking on the word to use, or biggest draft reaches as well. So we're going to be going over all of that. Thank you guys for listening or listening to or watching another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm Mason Kenahan signing off. See you guys in the next one. Good night.